First Baptist has such a rich history. As a matter of fact, it's over 150 years of rich history. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you all of it. I can talk that much, but I'm not going to be able to give it to you all today, okay? So myself, Brother Chase Simon Shackelford, and our pastor, Woodall, we will always share in this history given to you all today. Now, I want to get started here. In the 1800s, and I know you're thinking, why are you going back to the 1800s? Just work with me, okay? In 1860, South Carolina succeeds the Union. 1861, Abraham Lincoln is elected as President of the United States. 1861, Confederate States of America elects Jefferson Davis as their president. Now that's a conflict right there. When you say two people are elected to the same position at the same time. So when you have a conflict, it's just like the hot wind coming in with cold wind. There's a conflict, so what do we get? Tornadoes, right? We're going to get a war. And that's exactly what happened. In 1861, in Fort Sumter, South Carolina, the Civil War began. Now you must remember, our great state, the state of Alabama, is a part of this Confederate States. In 1862, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued by President Lincoln. This is in his second year of office. This reads, in its parody of reading, it says that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are, and henceforward shall be free. Henceforward means forever. I looked that one up to make sure. In 1865, President Lincoln is assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes president, and the Civil War shortly ends. I'm sure not with that group. No. You know, it was a whole lot of other stuff that happened. But in 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed. This was one of the 3 amendments during the Reconstruction period that was supposed to help the slave to be, I guess, acclimated into the world. But as we know, we still struggle because we were brown-skinned people. Now, I gave you all of that information so that you could be ready for this little information I'm about to give you. Now, 1866, the Ku Klux Klan is formed. Nobody's excited? Oh, okay. 1866, so is First Missionary Baptist Church. But their First Baptist Church colored. Now, you say, why are they called colored? My mind thinks this. The plantation that they lived on in Lawrence County probably took them to church, which was probably First Baptist Church. Now, the slaves were given the last name of their masters that owned the plantation, so these people were used to being given something. Their names, last names, first names, whatever. They were being used to giving hand-me-downs. They were being used to giving food. They were just used to being given or treated a certain kind of way. It didn't mean that they liked it, because you got to remember, the first slave ship had already come into existence in 1619. This was christened the White Lion that landed on Fort Monroe, Virginia. So this is already 247 years prior to 1866. So First Baptist colored, they're kind of used to being treated a certain way. Didn't mean that they liked it. They were just used to it. Didn't mean that they accepted it. They were just used to it. Didn't mean that they were going to stay being used to it, as you see today. They were just basically waiting on the world to change. Because, see, they can lock in these people's bodies. They can lock in some of their minds, but they can never lock in their spirits. Because had they locked in their spirits, you and I would not be sitting here today. Now, when they had this meeting in Sister Jane Young's home, along with Reverend Alfred Peters and 21 other slaves, remember, they're still slaves. It says in our thing that they were not slaves, but they were still slaves. They're not having a house like where you and I live in. There's no electricity. There's no running water. This is a house that has planks put together by some type of mortar now, because they built the White House in the early 1700s, I think. Somebody may have to correct me on that one. So they knew about mortar. So they had built those little huts down in what is called slave quarters. But I'm going to tell you something that I found out that was so very fascinating to me. These people, my people, they would, if they had something that they felt was of value, they would wrap it in rags and dig down deep in the earth. And you all know that if you dig deep further in the earth, it's going to get cool. They would hide their values down in the cool of the earth. Whether it's meat, whether it's something that they found, a little trinket or something that they thought of value, they would hide this. And I also found out they have had to dig potato holes deep enough, long enough to hide a person, to keep them from being killed. Ingenious people I come from. Now, these people did get together and decide, well, we want our own church. After hearing about all of this that I just told you, they said they want their own church. And they got together and they got their own church. They stayed there for about 7 years, and Reverend Alfred Peters stayed there with them about 7 years. And then they moved to the great city of Dectaur, Alabama, where they purchased an older congregation from the Methodist Church, a white Methodist church, on the corners of Market and Canal Street, northeast. Now you all know that that's the first street into the city of Decatur is Market. So you got to remember that had to be some prime property. Now I've led you a little bit out of slavery. Our brother Chase on Shackelford will take you forward.
So we're glad to have you. Like I said, my name is Chase on Shackelford, and I'm going to take you into the first half of the 20th century here at First Baptist. So let's talk about just a little bit about what the world was experiencing at this time. Okay, so these are the times of First Baptist, as I like to say. So the world in the early 20th century is experiencing technological and healthcare advances like never before seen. We have 2 world wars that happened within the first 50 years of the 20th century, and also a global pandemic. We know what that feels like, right? With the Spanish flu there starting in 1918. But also, opening the 20th century, okay, the British Empire would reach its zenith. Okay, so at one time they called it the empire on which the sun never set, because the British Empire ruled over a quarter of the world's population. With beginning in the 20th century, Queen Victoria still perched atop that empire as the reigning monarch, having ruled for over 60 years. Thinking about Christmas time right now, the Christmas trees that we put up, that is a holdover from our British heritage. Prince Albert, who was Queen Victoria's husband, with whom she had 9 children, and were definitely in love there. So Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, would bring that tradition of putting up Christmas trees from Germany to England, and we still do that today. So we can still see that British influence. So again, these are the times of First Baptist. Now that's worldwide. Let's talk about the nation. So in the first half of the 20th century, the United States of America would take its place as a great world power. But we'd also see the Great Depression, the economic hardship there, the push suffrage, okay, a decades-long push that would finally result in the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. And then also in the first half of the 20th century, we see the foundations of the modern civil rights movement for Black Americans. So again, these are the times of First Baptist. And then in our state of Alabama, we've got a lot going on as well. So in the first half of the 20th century, the state would further develop its industrial manufacturing and service base as opposed to relying exclusively or almost exclusively on agriculture for its economic base. And then also in 1901, Alabama would adopt her 6th Constitution. Yes. And so, of course, we now know here in 2022, we've just adopted a 7th Constitution. But in 1901, the 6th Constitution would be adopted. This would have the effect of disenfranchising most blacks, but thousands of poor whites across the state as well. Booker T. Washington, who was president of what is now Tuskegee University, would write a letter. You can still find this letter online in its entirety. Booker T. Washington would write a letter to the Alabama legislature in 1901 asking them to remember Black Alabamians in their deliberations on this Constitution. Of course, we know that that wouldn't happen, but I think that is amazing that he did take that stand to make sure that Black voices were heard at that time. Does anybody know how many times the original 1901 Alabama Constitution was amended? Anybody know? Any idea? Take a guess. 50. All right, good guess. Anybody else? It was amended 977 times. Okay, 977 times, making it one of the longest constitutions in the world, right here in the state of Alabama. Okay. Now, to compare that, the United States Constitution has only been amended 27 times. Okay? So the founders had lots of wisdom there in making sure that it would be a document that would last the test of time. But again, these are the times of First Baptist. So, leading up to the 20th century in 1895, the members here at First Baptist would begin planning to build a larger facility than the one they had built towards the end of the 19th century. In 1910, this lot was purchased for $1,460, and then in 1919, the current structure that we're sitting in would be erected. So it's been here for quite some time. Now I want to say a little bit more about this structure and the architect that designed the building that we're sitting in right now. W.A. Rayfield, or Wallace Augustus Rayfield, was the architect that designed this building. And he was from Macon, Georgia, and interestingly, he was only the second Black architect to be licensed in the United States. So he would receive his education at various institutions, but he would get his bachelor's in architecture from Columbia University, or what is now Columbia University in New York. Before that, he had also been educated at Howard University in Washington, D.C. So he's featured in a PBS documentary entitled Finding the Cornerstone. And this documentary does mention First Baptist, one of his creations. And so we're very proud of that. So again, that's Finding the Cornerstone. Maybe a documentary that you may want to look up. So the neoclassical Romanesque architectural style that we see here in First Baptist, that is something that you could compare to a lot of his other work. So it was something that he liked to use. Most famously, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. If you look at both churches, they are very, very similar, and he designed both of them. That church in Birmingham, Alabama, again, the 16th Street Baptist Church, is most famous for the 1963 bombing in which the 4 little girls lost their lives. Also, Wallace Augustus Rayfield was invited by Booker T. Washington to head the architectural department at what is now Tuskegee University. It's a post that he would take for a short period of time before going on to continue to develop his architectural firm in Birmingham. All right? So let's move further into the 20th century. All right? And we come to the 1930s. The infamous Scottsboro case. Anybody ever heard of the Scottsboro case? Okay? So the Scottsboro boys were 9 Black teenagers accused of raping 2 white women here in Alabama. We can imagine at the time what an explosive occurrence this would have been. Okay? The case was originally tried in Scottsboro, but then the retrials were moved to here in Decatur, right here in our own city. First Baptist was used as a meeting place to put together evidence by the defense to challenge the exclusion of blacks from jury rolls. Let's think about that for a minute. The building that we're sitting in now was used as a meeting place to bolster the defense for the Scottsboro case. And I think that that's amazing. Right? Again, this is 1931. Not only here at First Baptist, but another one of the leading black churches here in the city at the time was the First Missionary Baptist Church, which their original location is less than 2 miles from here. Okay? And a meeting was held there as well. Now, we don't have a picture of the meeting that took place here at First Baptist, but we do have a picture of the meeting that took place at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. This meeting took place the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and this is the picture there. You can see the lawyers sitting there in the pews right over there to the side. So this is the original Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church built in 1901. My grandmother was a member of this church, and she's told me about going to church there at that time. All right. So this is their original building. A little bit more history as far as connecting the two churches. When Shiloh rebuilt his church in 1957, First Baptist was the guest church to help them celebrate the commemoration or building a new church there. So those two churches would come together in 1957 when they rebuilt. All right? So that's the Scottsboro Boys case. So I brought you through about half of the 20th century. I just want to say that First Baptist has been and continues to be a place for Decatur's black community to engage in religious expression and education. Just one example of black achievement and organization. I think it's a mistake to focus exclusively on the oppression and the discrimination, but I think it's really insightful and hopeful to look at how these members of this community met that oppression as well, how they took it upon themselves to do something even in the situation that they found themselves in. Another thing I want to talk about is the music, which is really near and dear to my heart. So Miss Clara G. Key Johnson is a member of our church that still comes every Sunday, but she was the music director here for about 50 years. Okay? So she played the piano and the organ here. And so you can think about gospel music being sang in this room through the decades. And gospel music is, of course, has its origins in the first half of the 20th century as well. Okay? So again, thank you for coming. I'm going to pass it on to our pastor, and he will take us further into the 20th century.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storms and through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home.
I saw them tearing a building down. A gang of men in a dusty town. With a low heaven hold and a lusty yell, one swung in. The sidewalk fell. So I asked the foreman if these men were skilled, the men he would hire if he were to build. He laughed and said, "Oh, no, indeed. Common labor is all I need. But these men can wreck in a day or two. With a builders years to do. So I asked myself, if I went my way, what sort of role am I to play? Am I the builder who builds with care, measuring life by rule and square? Or am I the wrecker who walks the town, content with the role of tearing down? When the year 1970 opened, much had been done to break the spirit. Not only the people who gathered here and worship here, but our nation as a whole. The dreamer, Dr. King, who stood in the symbolic shadow of Lincoln, and declared a dream that called this country to live out the true meaning of its creed, had died. Yet, strangely, though the dreamer lay dead, the dream still lived. And though the dreamer was dead, there were still people in this nation, in this state, particularly in this church, committed to the ideal of building. As 1970 opened in First Missionary Baptist Decatur, building happened. Not only building that saw the church undergo extensive renovation to a sanctuary and a fellowship hall where we gathered and enjoyed one another's company, but building that led to greater education, greater understanding of one's self, and greater service to one's community. Building. Though so much had happened to break the spirit, people in this community, they still continued building. The Restoration Choir was established that sang gospel songs that lifted not only the head, but the heart. At a time where so much could weigh people down, they sang songs like, I love the Lord. He heard my cry. And then he died for us all. They built. It was under the administration of then the church's youngest pastor, Reverend Madison Brown, that an extensive renovation of this church was commissioned. At the tender age of 25 years old, under the leadership and the work of local artisans, this church was extensively repaired. In 1980, repairing the church so that the church was able to repair and serve the community. And over $100,000 in funding was secured by members here who valued the work of the church more than their own possessions they were building. Though so much had been done to hamper them or to hurt them, to dampen their drive and to kill their spirits, they were building. After phase one, a $100,000 extension that saw the addition of an education wing where children could come and learn not only who Jesus was, but how they could improve their educational prospects and life prospects through education. It happened because the church was building. In 1990, people came to Sunday school, Bible study, the Vacation Bible School, where they enjoyed not only the knowledge of a sweet and loving Savior, but sweet Kool-Aid and sweet graham crackers. And maybe that's what led so many of those young people to Christ. But ultimately, it was because the church was building. In 1991, under the leadership of Pastor Brown, the church was added to the Alabama Registry of Historic and Culturally Significant Places. A jewel in the crown of this church that had been so long a jewel in the crown of this community, and a place where people who the world tried to break would come Sunday after Sunday and be rebuilt so that they could continue the task of building they were building. That's the legacy of First Baptist. That's the legacy of the black church. People who the world tried to break, but kept building. Building churches, building communities, building family, building this country a platform on which it could stand and live live out the true meaning of its creed. We stand on the shoulders sidewalk fell. So I asked the foreman if these men were skilled, as men he would hire if he were to build, but he laughed and said, "Oh, no. Common labor is all I need, for these men can wreck in a day or two. But it took the builders years to do." So I asked myself, as I went my way, what sort of role am I to play? Am I the builder who builds with care, measuring life by rules square? Or am I the wrecker who walks to town, content with the role of tearing down? We are here because of builders who build their life, this church, and this community on an eternal God with unextinguishable love.